On December 31st, 1990, at precisely 11:59 p.m., a pizza delivery boy named Philip J. Fry tumbled backward into a cryogenic chamber. The timer set itself for 1,000 years. When he awoke on New Year's Eve 2099, the world had transformed beyond recognition. Flying cars, robot citizens, interplanetary travel, and yet somehow the human condition remained stubbornly familiar. This was the premise that Matt Groening and David X. Cohen built their animated series upon. A show that would become one of the most intellectually sophisticated programs ever broadcast on American television, even as it disguised its brilliance beneath layers of slapstick humor and absurdist comedy. What Groening and Cohen created in 1990 was not merely an animated sitcom about the future. They assembled one of the most academically credentialed writing staffs in television history and tasked them with a peculiar mission: to examine where humanity might be heading, for better or worse, and to make people laugh while doing so. The questions the show raised, sometimes explicitly, often buried in background jokes requiring freeze-frame analysis to appreciate, touched on something that scientists, philosophers, and ordinary citizens had been debating for decades. Is humanity getting smarter, or are we sliding inexorably toward a future of diminished intellect? The answer, as it turns out, is considerably more complicated than either possibility suggests. And the story of how we arrived at this moment, where research scientists cite animated television programs in academic papers, and where the jokes from a cartoon about a 1,000-year-old pizza delivery boy have begun manifesting in our daily lives, is a story about the nature of intelligence itself. In the spring of 1996, Matt Groening sat in his office contemplating what would come next. The Simpsons had been running for 7 years on Fox, had become a cultural phenomenon, and showed no signs of slowing down. The network executives wanted more. They approached Groening with a simple request: create another show. Groening, born Matthew Abram Groening on February 15, 1954 in Portland, Oregon, had already lived an improbable creative life. His father, Homer Philip Groening, had been a filmmaker and cartoonist, a Canadian Mennonite who grew up speaking Plautdietsch in Saskatchewan before moving to the United States. His mother, Margaret Ruth Wiggum, had been a teacher. The family names would later become immortalized. Homer Simpson, Marge, from Margaret, and Chief Wiggum all trace their origins to Groening's own household. Groening had started with a comic strip called Life in Hell in 1977, featuring a rabbit named Binky, who suffered through the indignities of modern existence. The strip caught the attention of James L. Meeting Generator Brooks, who was producing The Tracy Ullman Show and wanted animated segments. Groening, fearing he would lose the rights to his beloved rabbit, quickly sketched out a new family in the lobby before his meeting. The Simpsons was born from that improvisational act, and it changed television forever. But when Fox came calling for a second series, Groening knew he wanted something different. He began researching science fiction extensively, reading classic novels and watching films from the genre's golden age. In 1997, he recruited David X. Barr. Cohen, a writer on The Simpsons who had studied theoretical computer science at Harvard and held a master's degree in the subject from Berkeley, Cohen had also been a competitive mathlete, a participant in high-level mathematics competitions, and had published mathematical research papers during his academic career. Together they began building a world set in the year 3000. They spent months developing characters, storylines, and the internal logic of their future society. By the time they pitched the series to Fox in April 1998, Groening later admitted they had gone overboard in their discussions. The amount of detail they had assembled was staggering. Getting the show on air, Groening would later recall, was by far the worst experience of my grown-up life. Fox executives worried about the themes, arguing over creative control, but Futurama eventually premiered on March 28, 1999, introducing audiences to Philip J. Fry, the robot Bender, the one-eyed mutant Leela, and the senile Professor Hubert J. Farnsworth. What viewers did not immediately realize was that the show's creative team included some of the most highly educated minds ever assembled for a television comedy. Ken Keeler had earned his doctorate in applied mathematics from Harvard University in 1990. His doctoral thesis was titled Map Representations and Optimal Encoding for Image Segmentation. Before turning to comedy writing, he had worked at AT&T Bell Laboratories in the Performance Analysis Department. Jeff Westbrook held a PhD in computer science from Princeton, having completed his dissertation on algorithms and data structures for dynamic graph algorithms, under the direction of Robert Tarjan, one of the most celebrated computer scientists of his generation. Westbrook had an Erdős number of 3, meaning he had co-authored a paper with someone who had co-authored with someone who had worked directly with Paul Erdős, the legendary Hungarian mathematician. Bill Odenkirk, brother of actor Bob Odenkirk, had earned his doctorate in inorganic chemistry. This was not a normal television writing staff. The implications became apparent throughout the show's run. Mathematical and scientific references appeared in nearly every episode, some obvious, most obscure. In one episode, the robot Bender awakens in a haunted house to see the number 0101100101 written in blood on the wall. He shrugs. Then he passes a mirror and sees the reflection. 1010011010. Bender screams in terror. The binary number, when reversed, equals 666 in decimal notation. A joke that only viewers comfortable with binary mathematics would catch. But the most remarkable demonstration of the writing staff's capabilities came in 2010, during the show's 6th season. Ken Keeler was working on an episode called The Prisoner of Bender, which involved a mind-switching machine. The premise was simple. Professor Farnsworth invents a device that can swap the consciousnesses of 2 people. The complication was that the machine could not be used twice on the same pair of bodies. After the main characters engage in a frenzy of mind-switching, the question arises, can everyone be restored to their original bodies? Keeler realized that to resolve the plot, he needed to prove, mathematically, that any permutation of mind switches could be undone with the addition of just 2 people who had not previously used the machine. No such theorem existed in the mathematical literature, so Keeler created one. Working in the Futurama offices, he drafted a complete mathematical proof using group theory. The theorem demonstrated that regardless of how many mind switches have occurred among a group of people, all minds can be restored to their original bodies using only 2 additional people who have not participated in any prior switches. The proof appeared on screen in the episode, visible for mathematically inclined viewers to examine. Mathematicians at the University of California, San Diego later published a paper in the American Mathematical Monthly titled Keeler's Theorem and Products of Distinct Transpositions, refining and extending the result. It was the first known case of an original mathematical theorem being created solely for a television sitcom. Keeler himself described the proof modestly as a fairly standard piece of maths and suggested it was included primarily to popularize math among young people. The show was, to put it simply, remarkably smart, yet the world that Futurama depicted was not uniformly optimistic about human intelligence. The 31st century presented a society of striking contradictions. Technology had advanced to extraordinary levels. Interstellar travel was routine. Robots possessed consciousness and demanded civil rights. Heads of famous historical figures were preserved in jars and continued to participate in public life. Richard Nixon's head had somehow become president of Earth. But alongside these marvels, humanity itself seemed not to have advanced proportionately. The population remained easily distracted, susceptible to manipulation, obsessed with consumer products, and largely content with shallow entertainments. The Planet Express delivery company, where the main characters worked, was barely functional, managed by a 160-year-old scientist whose inventions as often destroyed things as helped them. Bureaucracy had become so entrenched that the central bureaucracy occupied a building requiring years to navigate. One of the show's recurring satirical targets was the media landscape. The news anchors Morbo and Linda presented headlines ranging from irrelevant fluff to mass panic with equal enthusiasm. Morbo, an alien who openly expressed his desire to destroy humanity, would deliver ominous pronouncements while Linda giggled beside him. The The satire reflected a media environment increasingly driven by emotion and entertainment rather than information and analysis. This vision aligned, perhaps uncomfortably, with concerns being raised by researchers studying a different phenomenon altogether. In 1981, a moral philosopher at the University of Otago in New Zealand began examining US Armed Forces mental records. James Robert Flynn had been born in Washington, D.C. on April 28, 1934, to Irish-American parents from Missouri. His father, Joseph, had left formal schooling at age 12 to work in a factory before becoming a journalist. Flynn himself had studied at the University of Chicago before emigrating to New Zealand in 1963, seeking a place where he could more freely pursue his left-wing political causes. Flynn was not a psychologist by training. He described himself as primarily a moral philosopher who merely had a holiday in psychology. But his examination of the military intelligence records would revolutionize understanding of human cognition. What Flynn discovered was startling. IQ test scores had been rising consistently throughout the 20th century. This was not a small effect. Between 1932 and the 1990s, scores had increased by roughly 3 points per decade, a total gain of nearly 20 points over 60 years. The pattern appeared across multiple countries and across different types of intelligence tests. Flynn published his findings in a landmark 1987 paper titled Massive IQ Gains in 14 Nations, What IQ Tests Really Measure. The implications were profound. If IQ tests measured innate intelligence, then a person with average intelligence in 1932 would score so low by 1997 standards that they would be classified as cognitively impaired. Conversely, an average person from 1997 transported back to 1932 would score in the gifted range. Neither conclusion seemed plausible. In 1994, Harvard psychologist Richard Herrnstein and political scientist Charles Murray published The Bell Curve, a controversial book that discussed Flynn's research and dubbed the increase in IQ scores the Flynn effect. The name stuck. Flynn spent the rest of his career trying to explain what the effect actually meant. He concluded that IQ tests measured not raw intelligence, but a particular mode of thinking, what he called viewing the world through scientific spectacles. Modern education, media, and work environments had trained people to think more abstractly, to classify information into categories, to manipulate hypothetical situations. When researchers asked people in 1900s what dogs and rabbits have in common, they typically answered in practical terms. You use dogs to hunt rabbits. The correct answer by modern testing standards, they are both mammals. Abstract thinking that was foreign to many people a century ago. This did not mean earlier generations were unintelligent. They simply understood the world differently. Flynn's research demonstrated that intelligence was not fixed. Environmental factors, education, nutrition, cognitive stimulation, the complexity of modern life could dramatically influence test scores. For those who believed intelligence was primarily genetic and unchangeable, Flynn was, as one colleague put it, a big pain in the ass. By the time Flynn delivered his 2013 TED Talk, Why Our IQ Levels Are Higher Than Our Grandparents, the lecture had attracted more than 2.8 million views. He had won the University of Otago's Gold Medal for Distinguished Career Research and been named a Fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand. He remained physically active well into his 80s. At the Otago Interclub track and field meeting in February 2020, he finished second in the men's over 50 grade 200-metre sprint with a time of 57.95 seconds. Flynn died on December 11, 2020, at age 86, but by then he had observed something troubling in his data. The Flynn effect appeared to be slowing, stagnating, or even reversing in several developed countries. Research from Norway, Denmark, Australia, Britain, the Netherlands, Sweden and Finland had begun showing statistically significant declines in IQ scores among younger cohorts. A 2018 study by Bratsberg and Rogeberg examining Norwegian military conscripts found that IQ scores had risen among those born between 1962 and 1975, but declined among those born afterward. Most significantly, the pattern appeared within families. Younger brothers were scoring lower than their older siblings, ruling out explanations based on immigration or demographic changes. Flynn himself, examining British data in 2009, found that IQ scores among 14-year-olds had dropped by more than 2 points between 1980 and 2008. For those in the upper half of the distribution, the decline was even steeper. He suggested the drop might be due to youth culture having stagnated or even dumbed down. In 2023, researchers at Northwestern University published findings examining American cognitive ability data from 2006 to 2018. The study analyzed nearly 400,000 participants using an online assessment called the Synthetic Aperture Personality Assessment Project. The results showed declines in 3 of 4 cognitive domains: verbal reasoning, logic and vocabulary, matrix reasoning, visual problem-solving and analogies, and letter and number series, computational and mathematical abilities. Elizabeth Dworak, the study's lead author and a research assistant professor at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine, cautioned against dramatic interpretations. The results, she noted, did not mean Americans were becoming less intelligent, but the pattern was consistent with what researchers had begun calling the reverse Flynn effect. This was where the satirical vision of shows like Futurama and the 2006 film Idiocracy began to seem less like exaggeration and more like uncomfortable prescience. Mike Judge had first conceived of Idiocracy in 1996. The same year, Groening began developing Futurama. Judge, creator of Beavis and Butthead and Office Space, imagined a future where natural selection had favored prolific reproduction over intelligence. The premise: educated couples kept postponing children, while less educated families had many, leading to a gradual decline in average intellect over generations. Originally titled 3001 Inches Before Judge Realized That Was Futurama's Setting, the film depicted a 26th century America where the most popular television show was Ow! My balls! Exactly what it sounds like. Where crops were irrigated with a sports drink because it contained electrolytes, and where the President of the United States was a former professional wrestler and porn star named Dwayne Elizondo Mountain Dew Herbert Camacho. 20th Century Fox released Idiocracy with no advertising whatsoever, one of the few cases of a major studio releasing a film without promoting it at all. The cinematographer Timothy Schursted later recalled that he had never seen a studio release where there wasn't even an ad for the newspaper, yet the film developed a cult following through DVD sales and gained notoriety as its satirical predictions began aligning with observable trends. Judge himself remained modest about his apparent prescience. "I'm no prophet," he told Time magazine in 2016, just months before a one-time WWE contender won the United States presidency. "I was off by 490 years. Notably, both Futurama and Idiocracy used the same narrative device: a person from the present frozen cryogenically and awakened in the future, but their futures diverged dramatically. In Futurama, technology had advanced spectacularly while human nature remained constant. In Idiocracy, technological infrastructure had been built by previous intelligent generations, but was now crumbling because no one remained smart enough to maintain it. Both scenarios offered commentary on the present by projecting it forward. The comparison was not lost on critics. One reviewer noted that Futurama's world, while satirical, showed civilization continuing to advance. Frozen Boy Fry is still a lower intelligence being in a society of technological wonders. Idiocracy depicted a civilization in terminal decline, sustained only by automated systems nobody understood anymore. The emergence of smartphones added a new dimension to these debates. In 2007, the same year, 20th Century Fox dumped Idiocracy into theaters without promotion. Apple released the first iPhone. The device would transform human behavior more rapidly than perhaps any technology in history. In 2010, Futurama returned after a 4-year hiatus with the episode Attack of the Killer App. The satire was direct and unsubtle. The show introduced the iPhone, a device implanted directly into the user's eye, paired with a social media application called Twitcher that allowed users to post short messages and videos to followers. The episode's commercial parody listed the iPhone's capabilities. With the new iPhone, you can watch, listen, ignore your friends, stalk your ex, download porno on a crowded bus, even check your email while being hit by a train. When Fry attempts to purchase one, the store clerk lists its flaws. It's $500. You have no choice of carrier. The battery can't hold a charge, and the reception isn't very. Fry interrupts. "Shut up and take my money," that final line. Fry silencing the clerk to purchase a clearly defective product simply because of its novelty became one of the show's most enduring memes, shared millions of times across the very social media platforms it satirized. The episode's plot involved Mom, the show's recurring villain and owner of Mom Corp, using the iPhone to harvest user data for targeted advertising. She then deploys a twitworm virus that transforms users into mindless zombies, compelled to purchase the iPhone 2.00. The satire aged disturbingly well. By 2017, researchers had begun documenting the cognitive effects of smartphone presence. Adrian Ward, an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin's McCombs School of Business, conducted experiments with nearly 800 smartphone users. Participants were asked to complete tests requiring full concentration while their phones were placed in one of three locations: on the desk face down, in a pocket or bag, or in another room entirely. The results showed that participants with phones in another room significantly outperformed those with phones on their desks. Those with phones in pockets or bags performed in between. Crucially, the effect occurred even when phones were powered off. The mere presence of the device was sufficient to reduce available cognitive capacity. Ward explained the mechanism. Your conscious mind isn't thinking about your smartphone, but that process, the process of requiring yourself to not think about something, uses up some of your limited cognitive resources. It's a brain drain. The study, published in the Journal of the Association for Consumer Research, provided some of the first rigorous evidence for what many had suspected, that smartphones were changing how human brains functioned, and not necessarily for the better. A 2023 study published in Scientific Reports found that the mere presence of a smartphone resulted in lower cognitive performance on concentration and attention tests among participants aged 20 to 34. Studies on GPS navigation showed that relying on turn-by-turn directions correlated with declining spatial memory capabilities. People who used GPS constantly were losing the ability to navigate without it. Louisa Darmany, a neuroscientist at Massachusetts General Hospital, had demonstrated in 2020 that GPS reliance cripples our spatial memory. As she told one interviewer, "While it's possible to use these tools in a mindful manner, I think that most of us will take the path of least resistance." The concept researchers used to describe this phenomenon was cognitive offloading, the delegation of mental tasks to external tools. The practice was not new. Humans had been using writing to offload memory for millennia. Calculators had reduced the need for mental arithmetic. Address books eliminated the need to remember phone numbers. But artificial intelligence represented something qualitatively different. It was not merely storing information, it was performing cognitive tasks that had previously required human judgment, analysis, and creativity. And research was beginning to suggest that this offloading came at a cost. A 2025 study examining the relationship between AI tool usage and cognitive abilities found a strong negative correlation, R equals minus 0.68, between frequent AI use and critical thinking skills. Cognitive offloading appeared to mediate this relationship. The more users delegated thinking to AI systems, the less they engaged in independent reasoning. Younger participants, aged 17 to 25, showed greater AI dependence and lower critical thinking scores compared to older generations. A Microsoft study warned that artificial intelligence tools might accelerate cognitive deterioration through over-reliance on automated systems. The researchers noted that by mechanizing routine tasks and leaving exception handling to the human user, you deprive the user of routine opportunities to practice their judgment. Attorneys had begun submitting court documents containing citations to legal cases that did not exist, hallucinations generated by AI language models that the attorneys had failed to verify. In 2023, a lawyer in New York filed a brief containing 6 fabricated case citations. Similar incidents emerged in other jurisdictions, demonstrating how automated systems could compromise professional capabilities even among highly educated workers. Preliminary research from MIT suggested concerning neurological patterns. Students who relied on AI tools from the start of writing tasks showed significantly lower brain connectivity in frontal, parietal, and semantic networks, regions associated with executive function, deep thinking, and integrating complex ideas. Some researchers reported a dramatic reduction in brain activity among AI-reliant participants, though these findings remained preliminary and required replication. The implications were significant. If cognitive faculties weakened through disuse, the neurological principle of use it or lose it, then outsourcing thinking to AI might produce precisely the kind of declining intellect that Idiocracy had depicted through evolutionary mechanisms and Futurama had satirized through consumerism and distraction. Yet this was not the complete picture. The same period that saw IQ scores plateau or decline in developed nations witnessed remarkable progress in global human development. Literacy rates had transformed utterly over 2 centuries. In 1820, only 1 in 10 people over age 15 could read. By 2024, the global literacy rate had reached 87%, more than 5 billion people. Countries throughout Latin America had gained 40 to 50 percentage points in literacy during the 20th century. In the United States, where 20% of adults were illiterate in 1870 and 80% of Black Americans could not read, literacy had become nearly universal. Global educational attainment had expanded dramatically. The proportion of the world's population completing secondary and tertiary education had increased by orders of magnitude. More people than ever before had access to more information than had existed in all the libraries of all previous human civilizations combined. Medical advances driven by scientific research had doubled life expectancy in developed nations over a century. Technology created by human intelligence had landed spacecraft on distant planets, decoded the human genome, and developed vaccines that could be created within weeks of identifying a new pathogen. The cognitive complexity required to navigate modern life far exceeded what previous generations had faced. Consider what an average person in 2025 must understand to function effectively. Digital interfaces, abstract financial instruments, global supply chains, sophisticated medical information, evolving social norms communicated through novel media platforms. The mental demands were immense. James Flynn had understood this paradox. The Flynn effect, he argued, did not prove that each generation was smarter than the last in some absolute sense. It demonstrated that each generation was better adapted to the cognitive demands of its particular environment. Great-grandparents who would have scored poorly on modern IQ tests possessed extensive practical knowledge, how to grow food, repair machinery, navigate by stars. Intelligence was not a single thing that could simply increase or decrease. It was a multifaceted capability that manifested differently in different contexts. Humanity was not simply getting dumber or smarter, it was changing. The writers of Futurama seemed to grasp this intuitively. Their 31st century was neither a utopia nor a dystopia, but a funhouse mirror reflecting the present. Technology had advanced, but bureaucracy had expanded proportionally. Medicine could preserve heads indefinitely, but healthcare remained confusing and profit-driven. Robots possessed consciousness and emotion, yet faced discrimination. The population had access to unlimited information through their iPhones, yet remained susceptible to manipulation by corporations and demagogues. Philip J. Fry, the protagonist, embodied this complexity perfectly. He was depicted as unintelligent by conventional measures, a slacker who had failed to achieve anything meaningful in his original 20th century life. Yet his unique neurology, the result of a time travel paradox in which he became his own grandfather, made him immune to mind control and the only person capable of saving the universe from the evil brain-spawn beings that could drain intelligence from any ordinary mind. The Niblonians, an ancient and wise alien race, dubbed Fry the Mighty One because his apparent cognitive deficits rendered him immune to attacks that would incapacitate anyone more conventionally intelligent. His mind, as Leela described it, was like a dress made out of carpet remnants, not functioning according to standard patterns, but functioning nonetheless. This was not a simplistic celebration of stupidity. It was a commentary on the limitations of traditional intelligence measures. Fry's emotional intelligence, his loyalty, his ability to persist through adversity. These qualities mattered as much as raw cognitive processing. The show suggested that human value could not be reduced to test scores. Ken Keeler, the Harvard-trained mathematician who had proven an original theorem for a sitcom, embodied a different truth. He had left a research position at Bell Labs to write jokes. His doctoral training in applied mathematics found expression not in academic papers, but in scripts that entertain millions while sneaking mathematical concepts past audiences who would never have sought them out, voluntarily. Keeler was not alone. J. Stuart Burns, another Futurama writer, had graduated magna cum laude from Harvard with a bachelor's degree in mathematics before earning his master's from UC Berkeley. His senior thesis had examined the structure of group algebras. He later moved to The Simpsons, where mathematical references continued to appear. These writers had chosen to deploy their considerable intellects, not in laboratories or universities, but in popular entertainment. And through that entertainment, they may have sparked more interest in mathematics and science than any number of academic papers. When Bender's serial number was revealed to be 1729, most viewers noticed nothing special. But those who knew the history of mathematics recognized it immediately. 1729 is the Hardy-Ramanujan number, famous because the mathematician G.H. Hardy had once mentioned to the prodigy Srinivasa Ramanujan that the taxi he had arrived in bore the uninteresting number 1729. Ramanujan immediately replied that it was actually quite interesting. The smallest number expressible as the sum of two cubes in two different ways, 1 plus 12 8 and 9 plus 10. Ken Keeler had made this choice deliberately. As he later explained, "That joke alone is worth 6 years of grad school, I'd say." The question posed by Futurama's existence, a show simultaneously among the smartest on television and accessible to mainstream audiences, was whether mass media necessarily meant diminished intellect. The show suggested the opposite was possible. Complex ideas could be packaged entertainingly. Mathematical theorems could appear in sitcoms. Sophisticated satire could coexist with fart jokes. The show's prediction of the iPhone had seemed like obvious satire when it aired in 2010. Apple's iPhone was already ubiquitous, and the joke simply extrapolated current trends. But the precision of certain details proved unsettling. The episode depicted users becoming addicted to checking their devices, broadcasting their lives through video sharing, competing for followers on social media platforms, and ultimately being controlled through the very technologies they had eagerly adopted. The twitworm that transformed users into mindless consumers queuing for the iPhone 2.0 was fictional, but the neurological research showing that smartphone presence reduced cognitive capacity, that social media activated reward circuits similar to addictive substances, that users experienced anxiety when separated from their devices, this was not fiction. No one was implanting phones in their eyeballs, though Samsung was indeed developing smart contact lens technology that would display information in the user's field of vision. But the show had captured something essential about the relationship between humans and their technologies, the tendency to adopt innovations that simultaneously enabled and constrained them, that expanded capabilities while creating new dependencies. AI tools could enhance human productivity, democratize access to expertise, accelerate scientific research, They could also encourage passivity, erode critical thinking skills, and create dependence that left users helpless when systems failed. Research from Harvard suggested that AI could be a helpful partner for specific expert tasks, assisting doctors with diagnosis, for example, while warning against treating AI as a general reasoning tool upon which thinking could be offloaded wholesale. As one expert noted, just as turn-by-turn navigation systems have led to many of us knowing the streets of the city in which we currently live in far less detail than the streets of cities we learned before smartphones and car-based GPS systems were widely available. It's likely that the ease of using LLMs will enable us to avoid engaging in certain challenging mental skills. The key distinction was between using tools as cognitive partners versus cognitive substitutes. A calculator helps perform arithmetic faster. It does not eliminate the need to understand mathematical concepts. A GPS provides directions. It need not prevent learning the underlying geography. AI could generate text. It should not replace the capacity for independent thought. When ChatGPT was asked directly whether AI could make people dumber or smarter, it responded, "It depends on how we engage with it, as a crutch or a tool for growth." This was precisely the nuance that both Futurama and the research on intelligence supported. Technology was neither inherently beneficial nor harmful to human cognition. Its effects depended on how it was used, what choices individuals and societies made, what educational systems prioritized, what cultural values prevailed. James Flynn had died just as the reverse Flynn effect was becoming widely discussed. He had spent his final years concerned about declining free speech, about the politicization of intelligence research, about the difficulty of discussing controversial topics without being attacked. His obituary noted that he had repeatedly laid out the evidence for the intellectual inferiority of blacks and then systematically demolished it, a description that captured both his willingness to engage with difficult subjects and his ultimate conclusions that environmental factors dominated genetic ones in explaining group differences. Flynn understood that intelligence was plastic, shaped by environment and culture. The same brain that would have scored 80 on an IQ test in 1900 could score 100 in 2000 simply because the person was raised in a more cognitively stimulating environment. This was neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It was simply descriptive of reality. If environments could raise intelligence, they could presumably lower it too. If the cognitive demands of modern schooling and modern work had pushed scores upward, a shift toward cognitive offloading and diminished intellectual challenge could push them downward. The reverse Flynn effect was not destiny, but it was warning. The Futurama writers seemed to anticipate this complexity. Their 31st century featured both technological miracles and human foibles. It was not idiocracy's nightmare of complete intellectual collapse, nor a utopia of enhanced human capability. It was recognizably human in all its contradictions. In one episode, the crew discovers that their seemingly routine delivery job was actually created by the Niblonians as part of an elaborate scheme spanning millions of years, all designed to position Fry to save the universe. The ordinary pizza delivery boy was, unknown to himself, the most important person in cosmic history. The metaphor was not subtle. Ordinary people dismissed as unintelligent or insignificant might possess capabilities and importance invisible to conventional measures. The 31st century's technological marvels had not eliminated the need for courage, loyalty, or determination. The iPhone and Twitcher had not made human connection obsolete. They had simply changed its forms. The story of whether society is getting dumber or smarter does not have a single answer. IQ scores rose for most of the 20th century and have plateaued or declined in some regions since. Literacy is higher than ever. Attention spans may be shorter. Access to information is unprecedented. Deep knowledge may be rarer. AI can augment human capabilities. It can also atrophy them. What Futurama offered was not a prediction, but a mirror. Its 31st century reflected the 20th century's anxieties about technology, bureaucracy, media manipulation, and human folly. That those reflections remain relevant a quarter-century after the show premiered suggests that the underlying concerns have not been resolved. Matt Groening, David X. Cohen, Ken Keeler, and the other writers created something genuinely rare, a popular entertainment that rewarded both casual viewing and careful analysis. They hid mathematical theorems in plain sight. They satirized the technologies their audience would adopt. They depicted a future that was neither doom nor salvation, but simply, recognizably, human. On December 11th, 2020, the day James Flynn died, Futurama had been cancelled and revived multiple times, just like the debates about human intelligence it had satirized. The show would return again in 2023 on Hulu, picking up where it left off, still mining the same anxieties about technology and humanity that had motivated its creation in 1996. Philip J. Fry, the pizza delivery boy frozen in 1990, remains frozen in the public imagination, a figure who stumbled into the future unprepared, lacking conventional intelligence, yet somehow capable of saving the world precisely because of what made him different. His confusion about the 31st century mirrors our confusion about our own rapidly changing present. We are not living in idiocracy's nightmare of complete cognitive collapse. We are not living in a utopia of enhanced human potential. We are living in something more like Futurama's vision, a world where technologies both empower and constrain us, where institutions both serve and frustrate us, where human nature remains stubbornly constant even as everything around it transforms. Whether society gets dumber or smarter may depend less on any inherent trajectory than on choices, what we teach, what we value, how we use the tools we create. The mathematical theorem Ken Keeler invented for a cartoon proved that even the most tangled mess can be sorted out with the right approach and a couple of fresh minds. Perhaps that is the lesson Futurama offered all along. The future is not determined. Human capability is not fixed, and even a pizza delivery boy from the 20th century might turn out to be exactly what the universe needs. The question is not whether we are getting dumber or smarter. The question is what we choose to do with the intelligence we have.